Welcome to another week of the research seminar in pharmacy systems outcomes and policy. Time with the card. The host of this seminar, Todd Lee, is unfortunately unavailable, so he asked me to fill in from him. And in addition, I have the pleasure of Andrea Monteiro being one of my graduate students anyway, so Todd was going to ask me to introduce her. So, Andrea, MSc, is currently a second-year PhD student in our department. You hold a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology from the University of Trás-os-Montes and Alto Douro.
Yeah, almost.
Portugal. Andrea's correcting me because she hears me every once in a while correct her English, so she's taking pleasure in correcting my Portuguese.
It's very rare.
And she also has a Master's of Science in Health Technology Assessment from the National Institute of Cardiology and Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. So far, so good.
Yeah.
She was a research fellow and lecturer at the National Institute of Cardiology at the National Cancer Institute in Rio de Janeiro. Her research focuses on health valuation and health preference research, and she was involved in the development of the value set for the EQ5E3L in Brazil, and then came here and has shifted to do some work with us in other areas, including measuring satisfaction and measurement development around some of the activities we're doing in academic detailing. So please help me in welcoming Andrea.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today presenting my work to you guys. Please let me know if I need to speak louder, because sometimes as the time goes, I tend to speak lower. Please let me know if you want me to speak louder. So today I'm going to talk to you about a project that kept me busy during last summer, and this project was the development of a measure of prescriber satisfaction with academic detailing interventions. And okay, but before going ahead, I need to acknowledge the contributions of all these people that are listed here. The UIC team, most of you are here in the class today. Todd is not here, and the academic detailers and the specialists that contributed to this project. Without their contribution, it would have been very difficult to do this work. So thank you guys, and I will start by providing a background about what I'm about to present to you guys today. And in this background, I intend to provide the motivation for developing this measure. Then I'm going to go over the study aims, the methods, the results, discussion and limitations of the study, and some conclusions. I welcome questions at any time, but if you want to save them to the end, I'm also up for that. Okay. According to data recently published by the CDC, every day more than 150 people in the U.S. die of overdose. Here in this figure, you have two lines that show the trends in prescription opioid deaths and in opioid prescription, and you can see that the trends mirror each other. The rates of prescription opioids overdose deaths increased substantially in the U.S. during these last 2 decades, and the patterns of opioids prescribing have been shown to be associated with risks of mortality, of overdose, for overdose, not only for caused by prescribed opioids, but also other types of opioids in general. So, in spite of the efforts to curb this crisis, the prescription opioid misuse and dependence continues to have their origins in the excessive or improper prescribing of medications by healthcare professionals. And to address this crisis while preserving the access to appropriate pain management treatment, stakeholders across the U.S. healthcare system are attempting to implement strategies to ensure that opioids are safely and appropriately prescribed. Some evidence shows that excessive opioid overprescribing may be a result of both lack of careful consideration about the risks and benefits of opioids, and also lack of knowledge about the appropriate alternatives for treatment of pain. And in this scenario, our educational outreach interventions have been taking place and have been shown to be quite effective to motivate prescribing behavioral changes. One of these educational outreach modalities is the academic detailing, that is a non-commercial education outreach initiative that involves prescriber education by trained healthcare professionals. And it has been shown to be effective way to improve clinical decision making and prescribing behavior. Okay. So the development of the measure that I'm going to talk about today, it was took place under the umbrella of this study. That was the impact of academic detailing in Chicagoland region, a pilot study that took place here in the UIC College of Pharmacy, and that it's being conducted by some colleagues in the classroom, and that was developed under the umbrella of the Prevention First Aids program and funded by the CDC. This academic detailing intervention was developed by the UIC team as a means to provide to primary care practitioners with information for treatment of patients with chronic pain following the CDC guidelines for this purpose. So here we have a little bit of detail about the study design of this academic detailing study. This study was composed by 2 academic detailing visits that were conducted by trained academic detailers. These were one-on-one, face-to-face encounters that lasted for about 15 to 30 minutes. These visits were included the following elements: were composed by an introduction, then the detailer went over key aspects of the CDC guidelines with a prescriber. Both of them review the prescriber opioids prescribing metrics that were obtained from the PMP. And at the end of the intervention, the prescriber would fill a questionnaire about their satisfaction with the intervention. The second visit took place about 6 weeks following the initial visit, and both visits had about the same structure. Okay. So in this context, we intend to measure satisfaction to fill some gaps or to attend some aims of this study. We want to measure satisfaction to monitor how the implementation of the study is going, both in terms of the acceptability and feasibility of the intervention. We also want to measure satisfaction to use it as an outcome per se of the study, and we want to measure satisfaction to help us understand other outcomes, as for instance behavioral modification. Satisfaction with products and interventions is a critical determinant of behavioral change, and that is something that is evident across literature of several different areas, as for instance marketing or in education and healthcare. And we also know that satisfaction has an emotional and a cognitive component. Satisfaction can also refer to reactions to aspects of the service delivered, or about perceptions of overall perceptions of the quality of the service and its impacts on the person that receives the service. In this specific case, provider satisfaction is an indicator of effectiveness of academic detailing visits, because it has been shown to be associated with the effectiveness of the academic detailing visits. And published studies typically assess satisfaction using single items or scales that are not validated. So this is the novelty of this study. We want to develop a measure that it's validate with psychometrically validated and that can be used to measure satisfaction with other academic detailing interventions. So we aim with this study to develop this measure of prescriber satisfaction with academic detailing interventions, and for that we will follow several steps. First, we define the constructs of the measure. After that, we develop the items that will compose the measure. We collect the data on these items, and we assess the psychometric properties of the resulting measure. And after this, I just want to stress that this is a dynamic process, and developing a measure usually it's a cyclic process. We develop a measure, collect the information, test the validity, and sometimes that results in modifications in the measure, and then we have to start the process again. So this is not something that will be definitive, probably. And here it is, the slide that says exactly what I just said to you about developing measures. So this is usually a process that is non-linear, and that each one of these phases can appear at any moment, but usually follows this structure. Here, there are like a compilation of some of the psychometric properties that we will be looking at during this analysis. We will look at content validity that basically relates to the coverage of the conceptual domain of interest. We will be looking at criterion validity that relates to how well the measure, the test scores correspond to a particular external criterion measure. And under this definition, we can have concurrent and predictive validity. Concurrent refers to the correlation between the scores and the criterion measure, and predictive refers to the ability of the measure to predict something that should theoretically be able to predict. We also are going to look at construct validity that examines hypothesized relationships between constructs, and finally we will also look at reliability, in particular internal consistency of the scale. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about how we define the constructs that compose this measure. The first step was to identify themes related to the prescriber satisfaction in education-related interventions, and after that we conducted a literature review to see what is already published in the literature. This literature review targeted manuscripts published in English and were searched through in Medline via PubMed, and the search strategy that we used had all those descriptors, for instance, academic detailing, educational outreach.
Some heating unit here. We can't really hear you.
Okay.
So can you project as much as you can?
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
Thank you. The themes and constructs were extracted by one reviewer with input of the core group, and after conducting the literature review, we also consulted an advisory group and obtained input about the themes and the constructs that were identified in the two previous steps. For the item development, we generate the items based on the constructs that we found in the literature review, but we also had some input from experts that were asked to comment whether the items were adequately worded and covered the areas that they were supposed to cover. And while they were doing that, they were encouraged to tell us if they could think about additional constructs or items that could integrate our measure. I just have to tell you that we couldn't build a measure that was too long because we had some risk constraints related to time, and the intervention had to be short to be feasible. So the length of the questionnaire also have to be kept short. So in terms of the psychometric properties of the instrument, we looked at reliability by looking at item total correlations and item total correlations when the items are emitted, and for that we used Spearman rank correlations, and we also looked at Cronbach's alpha. To look at the criterion validity, we explored it using scores from the visit and the visit 1, and we saw how they were related to the participation in visit 2. And this would be our predicted validity. Maybe this weren't like the ideal criteria because we wanted to use something as a behavioral change to look at this criterion validity, but this was the best information that we had available to us like this far. We looked at construct validity by conducting an exploratory factor analysis, and for that we tested several different ways to construct the factor analysis. We tried using Pearson product moment and or polychoric correlations to construct the correlation matrix. To get to the factors, we tried different methods of doing the factor analysis, and we also tried different rotations, and results that I will show you today were the results that emerged from the best combination of these different methods. We also test convergent validity by testing the correlation between these scores for this measure that we developed with a measure that was intended to assess detailer's perception of effectiveness of the interview using Pearson product moment correlations to do that. So these are the results from the literature review. We identified 66 titles. We excluded 54 of those titles because they based on the exclusion criteria that were established. We ended up with 12 titles, and then that we were read in full. 5 of those 12 titles were excluded after reading the full article, and then at the end we end up with 7 titles. And from this analysis, we got to 6 teams. Those teams were acceptability, feasibility, usefulness, perception of efficacy, overall satisfaction with the quality of the interviews, and willingness to repeat the experience. These were the themes that in the literature have been used to assess satisfaction with this kind of interventions. So here we have the first version of the questionnaire. After the first round of item generation, we obtained these 8 items that are related with the detailer knowledgeable, the detailer was effective, communicator. Academic detailing is an effective way to get updated on important topics. The printed material was useful. I would be receptive to future visits. This topic was relevant to my practice. This was an important topic. The key messages are feasible to implement in my practice. These were the first 8 items. And then after consulting the specialists, we added 2 other items that were my practice is likely to change as a result of this visit, and the key messages were consistent with my practice. The response scale that we adopted was a Likert scale with 5 options that were not at all, slightly, moderately, very, and extremely. So the lowest score possible in this scale were 10, and the highest were 50. Okay, here we have some results about the sample characteristics for both visit 1 and visit 2, and I think it's worthwhile to stress that these individuals, that participated in visit 1, they were the same that participated in visit 2. The difference in the numbers is due to some losses of follow-up. So the characteristics or the balance in the characteristics of the sample is similar in both visits. The only difference, I think, that really can be seen like this, it's the proportion of residents is slightly lower in the second visit. In terms of years of practice, we have like the mean and the standard deviation of the years of practice. They were also very similar. We had an 82.3% response rate for the first visit, and an 84.9% retention rate for the second visit. So it was pretty successful in this terms. Here in this table in the bottom, you can see the mean and the mean scores for this instrument, the satisfaction instrument for both visits. They were very similar for both visits. Okay, so here we have some of the results that's concerned to the items, and in this slide we have the item level descriptive statistics for the first visit. In the first visit we had 183 responses, and as you can see, for almost all the items, with the exception of item 9, over 50% of the participants classified their response as extremely, which is a very good in terms of satisfaction. It shows that they were very satisfied. And when you look at the responses that are split between 4 and 5, almost everyone classified their experience as 4 out of 5. Item 9 is a little bit different, and you will see that item 9 will stand out across all the presentation. So yeah, this is the first red flag for item 9. In terms of missingness, and I decided to include the missings here, because sometimes when we are developing a new measure, it is important to know if there is any item that causes discomfort or that people don't want to answer. So that's why I included the missings here, and we can see that it's negligible, I think, the amount of missing. So we don't have any item that stands out as very difficult or potentially uncomfortable for the prescribers. Here we have the same results for the visit 2. We have overall the same trends. Everyone, over 50% of participants described their experiences as extremely for almost all items, with the exception of item 9. And the item 9 is the one that has answers more spread through all the response options. Otherwise, almost everyone classified their experiences very or extremely. Same conclusions in regards to the missingness. Now let's look at the reliability of the scale. And here we are looking at the visit 1, the results from the visit 1. We have item total correlations, item total omitting the item correlations, and Cronbach's alpha. Let's start with the item total correlations. So here we have correlations that are high, and the item total correlation is one type of indicator that allows us to see how well the item is discriminating amongst individuals. And we can see that overall, when looking at the item total correlation, all the items have a very good performance. When we look at item total and meet the item correlations, we see that all of them maintain the same performance, but for the item 9. Which means that when we exclude the variance of item 9 from the total variance of the score and do the correlation, the correlation drops, and that's kind of an indicator that item 9 may not be as discriminating as well as the other items. When you look to the Cronbach's alpha, the overall Cronbach's alpha of the scale is very high, which is good, which indicates a good internal consistency of the scale. And when we exclude each one of the items, the Cronbach's alpha drops, with the exception of item 9. Because as you can see, when we drop item 9, the Cronbach's alpha goes up a little bit, just a little bit, but it goes up, and it's like the second red flag for item 9. Okay, here we have the same results for visit 2, the trends. Here, when we exclude item 9 from the when calculating the Cronbach's alpha, the Cronbach's alpha does not go up, so it is a little bit better. So it's a point in favor of item 9. Here we have some results that relate to the criterion validity, and our hypothesis was that higher satisfaction at the visit 1 would predict continued participation. For instance, the participants would agree to participate in the visit 2. The results that we obtained, they don't support that hypothesis. As we can see, we have the mean and the standard deviation of the scores, satisfaction scores for visit 1, and for in the visit 1, and we have in the columns people that agreed and did not agree to participate in visit 2, and the mean satisfaction of people that did not agree to participate in visit 2 was higher. We had to explore this further to see how these individuals were different, but using this criterion, our instrument doesn't show to have a criterion validity. In terms of convergent validity, and as I said before, we tested this convergent validity by testing the correlation with the instrument to assess the tailor's perceptions of the effectiveness of the intervention. We obtained positive, statistically significant, but moderate or even low correlation coefficients. So it shows to be convergent. But we also, I don't know to what extent we could expect correlations that were higher than this, because the other instrument was filled by the detailer and not by the provider, so it's natural that they don't match completely, but they at least seem to be positively associated. Okay, here we have the results for the factor analysis. And for the factor analysis, basically, we are trying to identify how many constructs or different factors that we have in our scale or instrument. And usually, we use something that is called the Kaiser criteria, that says that factors that appear or that display a value of over 1, eigenvalue of over 1 should be retained, and the other should not be retained as factors of the scale. In this slide, you have a graph that it's a scree plot that shows in the y-axis you have the eigenvalues, and in the x-axis you have the number of factors, and only one factor had an eigenvalue higher than 1, and so we can say that we have one factor solution for this scale according to this data. The eigenvalue obtained for this factor was of 5.798. And in the table, we have the factor loadings that are basically the correlations of each one of the items with the factor. And we have the uniqueness, that is the proportion of the variance in the item that is not explained by the underlying factor. We can also look at item 9, is the one that has lower factor loading and higher uniqueness. To construct this factor analysis, I used the polychoric correlation matrix, principal axis factoring, and the rotation with Varimax. Varimax is the orthogonal rotation that doesn't allow for correlations between factors. I was thinking about using a oblique rotation as Promax, because in social sciences we know, or at least you expect the factors to be correlated with each other, but because we only obtained one factor, that at the end doesn't make a difference, so I opted for Varimax. So here are the results for the factor analysis for the visit 2. And we have almost the same thing, the same pattern of results. One factor solution, the eigenvalue was very similar. The factor loadings are consistent to what was obtained in the factor analysis for visit 1, and the uniqueness also is the same pattern. Also, item 9 also appears to have like a high uniqueness here, but it's not the only one. So we can see that the results for visit 2 are a little bit different from visit 1, but they don't generate different conclusions. Okay, so here we wanted to explore the question of the item 9 a little bit further, so we resorted to some item response theory analysis to do that. And in this graph, you can see the item information function graph. In the y-axis, you have the information that is given by each item, and in the x-axis, you have the data, that is the underlying construct that is being assessed, in this case satisfaction. And we have a data range that is all the continuum of the construct that is being observed. We can see that almost all items show the same pattern in the information curves, but for item 9 again. So item 9, that is this lowest item curve, displays doesn't seem to be related to the other items, and it seems to contribute with the low information about the underlying construct. All the other items seem to contribute with an important amount of information, but as you can see, all the curves begin to drop after the mean of the ability, that is in the 0, which indicates that we might be in the presence of a ceiling effect. It means that we in the highest tip of the continuum of the construct, we don't have items that discriminate individuals on that end of the construct. Okay, here we have the same results for visit 2, and as you can see, the conclusions would be the same. Item 9 is also lower. All the other items are higher. All the items, all the curves drop around the mean trait, so it's consistent with what the findings from visit 1. Here, just as a curiosity, we have some results about the total score, and I did some subgroup analysis. No statistical significant differences were found, but we have some differences, for instance, between residents and non-residents. In this middle graph, it refers to different types of providers, and the first graph refers to female and male scores. Okay. So overall, the instrument shows to have a very good internal consistency with Cronbach's alpha over 0.9, with the exception for item 9. All the items appear to relate to a single construct, as it is indicated by the factor analysis, and with the exception of results that suggest that item 9 should be dropped or reported separately, because the likelihood of the visit to change the practice may still be relevant for academic detailing, but in this case, it doesn't seem to be contributing for the satisfaction measurement. This instrument is able to differentiate among individuals with different levels of trait satisfaction, particularly in the lower levels of trait, which arguably it's what we are, in this case, interested in, because we want to actually see who wasn't satisfied at all, and who was moderately satisfied with our intervention. Maybe if we want to discriminate other levels of satisfaction, we would need to include other items, maybe more specific items or some different kinds of items. Some limitations of this study. This study was not designed for measure validation. It was we assumed an opportunistic approach. We also had the time constraints that I told you before, and this study may not be powered to test hypotheses about the relationships between constructs and the characteristics of the individuals. Some of the results require further investigation. For instance, examine item-specific responses at visit 1 and visit 2 to better understand the predictive and criterion validity and this behavior of item 9 to actually make a final decision. So as I told you, this is a dynamic process, and we will probably revisit the structure of the instrument before publishing. So as conclusion, we have that for now we have an initial 10-item measure that was developed to assess prescriber satisfaction with academic detailing visits. This measure has the potential to be applied in academic detailing studies beyond the scope of opioids prescribing, because I don't know if you know this, but none of the items were specific to to opioids prescribing. So it's reasonable to assume that we can apply this measure in other studies. And visit 2 data collection is still ongoing, or it just finished. So we are still working on the analysis to make a decision about the final structure of the instrument. And this is it. The references that I used for this, most of all for the methodological component, and I'm open for questions.
That was great, Andrea. I could barely hear a thing, but I think that it was,
sorry.
I could read your lips really well from back there. Can you guys hear? Okay. I'm getting pretty old, and that's the problem. Hey, so yeah, Dolly.
Yes.
You're well enough to have a question. It was a very great presentation, Andrea. So my question is, like, did you classify the results on the basis of the scores? Like, were the same set of people always like answering extremely or like very satisfied? Or like, was there variation in like each individual's responses? Like, were certain people always answering on one side of the scale versus like some people always answering on the other side of the scale?
Because I looked at that, and because almost everyone responded at the highest, the extreme side of the scale. I don't know if we had representation of different patterns of response to actually look at that, but it was one of the things that I looked at in the beginning, and when I looked at the item descriptive statistics to actually understand if we had like different patterns of response. But it doesn't, even if we compare the scores and responses according to participants' characteristics, we also don't get like a difference. So I don't know. But, yeah, thank you. Rachel.
Okay, so I guess I have 2 questions. One is more technical and one is more conceptual. So I'll ask the technical one first. In your factor analysis, where you did visit 1 and then you did visit 2, looking at the uniqueness and factor loading for question 9, you pointed out in both of them that question 9 stood out, but the uniqueness in 9 dropped quite a bit in visit 2 compared to visit 1. Is there a sort of a rationale for why you might think that be the case? Is it like a memory effect or familiarity, or what do you think?
Yeah, we noticed that, and we also noticed that the Cronbach's alpha for visit 2, it didn't went up with item 9 when we dropped item 9. So there is something different in the second visit. But to be completely honest, based on the analysis that I conducted so far, I tried to look at the characteristics of the patients and how did they answer to item 9 in both visits, and I couldn't find anything that explained that. So maybe we will have to think a little bit more about what motivated them for the second visit and what was the differences in the approach during the second visit that actually made them respond differently to item 9.
Before you follow up on the conceptual question, can I just ask Andrea about that specific question? So, Andrea, can you think of a sub-analysis that you could do to better understand what happened with question 9 from visit 1 to visit 2?
What I did so far was to compare the characteristics of the people that dropped and how they respond to this item. More than that, maybe
What did you find? So those that dropped out, are they partially responsible for that change in response?
I couldn't find any difference in their patterns of response to item 9. So.
Okay.
Sorry, it's back on question 9, but you sort of alluded to the fact, like, what to do with 9.
Mm-hmm.
Drop it or do you keep it?
Mm-hmm.
And I just from hearing about this presented in other settings, I know, like, feasibility, I think, was one of your topics that was
One of the
part of
concerns,
satisfaction.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that, how are you proposing to kind of go back and validate if maybe feasibility is a second factor that you're just not capturing fully, or like how to handle that? And is it really appropriate to drop it as conceptually you think it is?
If I had a conceptual framework that were solid enough to tell me that I could have more than one factor, I could try to do some confirmatory analysis, factor analysis, and force more than one factor, but I don't know to what extent that would solve this issue, or even if it would be the best solution in this case. So, that makes sense. Thank you. We have some questions here.
Go ahead.
Okay, Mary.
So on question 9, I'm wondering if this was just a 2-visit, intervention.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if after maybe perhaps repeated visits over a long period of time, because this question is asking about feasibility, willingness to
Mm-hmm.
change. What happened if over time there is this willingness to change from, I don't know if that would be possible.
But that is something that I can capture with the explicit data that we have. So maybe we would have to explore that further, or just throw this possible explanation as a justification for this differences that we are observing, and try to follow up on this later. But yeah, that is something that can explain. And also, maybe something in visit 2 might be a little bit more focused toward behavioral change or more objective, because I remember that when we were talking about visit 2, we were addressing specific questions from the physician, so maybe that could be also something that caused this difference.
I was just going to ask, what was the difference between visit 1 and visit 2? If they're sort of signaling about characteristics of visit 2 that are given in visit 1.
Mm-hmm. Overall, they share the same structure. The detailer went over the CDC guidelines and the metrics of the prescriber, and because the visits was so short, we didn't have time to do much more than that. But in visit 2, we also had a component in which we addressed some doubts. We follow up on some doubts that were manifested in visit 1. So this personalized component, maybe it's like the most important difference between the two visits.
It seems like it's possible if you're very satisfied with visit 1, because the person's really good, and they've conveyed their message. It seems possible that I could be very satisfied with visit 1 and not feel like I need visit 2.
Yes, that was.
So the hypothesis, I
for the
get why,
criterion
oh,
validity.
I got something out of this,
Yeah.
but only if I thought I was gonna sort of get more information out of visit two.
Yeah,
It seems to me that you could have a perfectly good measure of satisfaction here and not predict one in visit two for that
Yes.
reason, especially in such a short.
It's just the fact that we didn't have any other measure available now to measure predictive validity. That's why I decided to use the visit to uptake to assess that. But that is a perfectly plausible explanation for why
I think it's a reasonable thing to look at that, I'm just
Yes.
saying, that's why I don't think I'd throw it out.
Yes.
because it's that.
No. Okay.
Who administered this tool? Was it the academic detailer, or did the provider do it?
The provider did it alone in the end, and then sealed it in a envelope. So
Was the academic detailer there, though?
the academic detailer was maybe Chris. No, he wasn't present. Okay. He was out of the room as frequently as possible. Yes.
Great presentation, great work that you're doing here. Sir, off of your question, there's an item in the survey that says, are you receptive to future visits? So I think like 80% of those people after visit one indicated that they would be receptive to future visits. So although they may be satisfied, there may be like an additional, they may still be down to have visits in the future. But Andrea, my question for you is, for that predictive or criterion that you were assessing, if the reasons were unrelated to satisfaction, that those 26 people did not have a second visit, such as logistical issues scheduling, or residents graduating, moving out of the state, or offices, closing, just not being able to have the visit, how do you think, and I don't know this answer, but how do you think that, if you know that explanation for why they didn't have a second visit, how do you think that would impact how you would interpret the criteria?
It will help me to justify the findings. I would never be able to actually attribute the result to that, but I could use that to justify what I found. And yeah, that is reasonable.
Andrea, what kind of analyses did you do to look at the subgroups to compare for different?
I just compared means and proportions, like simple hypothesis.
Do you know how to do differential item function?
Yes, I do. I did that, but I didn't present the results because.
I was just going to suggest it might be something that you think about, because that was item by item, as you well know, instead of overall, it's a little more sensitive.
Yeah.
The other thing is, do you plan to move this measure forward as it is, or would you, I know there's this item 9 issue, but.
Yeah, as soon as we figure out the item 9 issue, yes, we plan to move this forward and to write the manuscript and publish.
I also, this is just, from my training, 0.9 is a really high Chromebook alpha, and suggests you have too many items. That, and I come from a world where I was trying to get fewer questions as possible, and even when you were dropping items, your Chromebook alpha was staying very stable.
Yeah.
I mean, usually you'll get a drop in like 2/10 or something like that. So I just something to think about.
Okay.
I don't know, patient satisfaction like this is not something I'm familiar with, but it's something just to check into.
Any more questions? I just wanted to mention that Andrea kind of led a lot of this analysis herself, so it's very impressive that she, and we haven't had a chance to kind of get together as a group of investigators and flesh out some of these issues about what to do with item 9. So thanks for pointing out these suggestions. Andrea and I met this morning. These research seminar presentations are a great opportunity to move projects along, aren't they? So we got a lot to build off of. I want to thank everyone for coming today. If you have any more comments or input for Andrea, I'm sure she'll welcome it. So thanks so much for coming today.